In 2006, demolition crews tearing into the decaying walls of the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts found something that made them stop the wrecking balls. Hidden deep within the impenetrable masonry of this monumental 19th century asylum wasn't construction debris, but impossible artifacts. Small, meticulously carved wooden figures belonging to no known folk tradition of the American Northeast. Documents written in a flowing, cursive script that archivists could not attach to any recognized European language, and strange, precise metal instruments with no identifiable purpose. These items were sealed inside stone walls, supposedly laid by men with horses and hand tools, in an era that couldn't possibly have constructed the building itself. The official record tells us this sprawling, castle-like complex was hastily erected to house the mentally ill of a fledgling nation. But the artifacts whisper a much darker truth, a coordinated global campaign of erasure, a timeline that was meticulously overwritten. Because Danvers wasn't an isolated anomaly, it was a cage. And to understand exactly who was locked inside, we have to look at the ground beneath our feet and the buildings we walk past every single day. Stand in front of a monumental 19th century post office, a grand train station, or an old city hall, and look closely at the foundation. Look at the first floor windows sitting bizarrely at ankle height, their bottom halves swallowed by the earth in cities with absolutely no geological reason for it. Look at the sheer scale of the architecture. It feels older than it is supposed to be. It feels like it has seen something grand beyond any practical necessity, precise beyond any reasonable expectation of the mid-1800s. The official explanation, built in 1874, built in 1861, built by this specific architect for this specific civic purpose, never quite reaches the bottom of what you are actually looking at. Because something happened before that, something catastrophic, a reset so completed, buried the ground floors of buildings on every inhabited continent. You can see it in the surviving photographs from the mid-1800s. Empty streets, mud-caked avenues, and massive, intricate stone structures standing completely finished in the background. Some researchers call it a mud flood. Others point to plague, to anomalous atmospheric events, to weapons or technologies we do not have the language for yet. We don't know exactly what the mechanism of destruction was, but the buildings remember, and the maps remember. Before a certain decade in the 19th century, global maps show a massive, sophisticated civilization spanning most of the known world. It was called Tartaria. Then, in the exact same years that the Earth seems to have swallowed the lower halves of those city streets, Tartaria simply vanishes from the cartographic record. It wasn't conquered by a rival empire. It wasn't absorbed through a treaty. It wasn't politely renamed. It was excised, erased. And in the eerie, undocumented silence immediately following that erasure, someone simultaneously built, on every inhabited continent, hundreds upon hundreds of monumental stone structures, post offices that look like imperial palaces, train stations that look like cathedrals, courthouses equipped with passive ventilation systems that modern engineers still struggle to replicate, and asylums, asylum after asylum, after asylum, manifesting with an unsettling exactness, mirroring the architectural language of all those other grand civic buildings. All of it raised, we are told, by men working with wooden scaffolding, horse-drawn carts, and hand-forged tools in construction. Timelines that simply do not add up. They weren't built, they were inherited. And if a newly formed society simply inherited the empty buildings of an erased civilization, it forces a question that nobody in the official historical record ever wanted to ask. What did they do with the people who were still inside them? Where did they take the last Tartarians? Let me tell you what we are told. We are told that the mid-19th century saw a massive humanitarian revolution in the treatment of the mentally ill. We are told that progressive reformers, like Dorothea Dix, campaigned tirelessly to move the insane out of squalid poorhouses and local prisons, transitioning them into grand purpose-built institutions. We are told that the Kirkbride Plan, a specific, highly complex architectural philosophy developed by Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride in 1854, became the dominant template for asylum construction across the United States, and, miraculously, across much of the developed world simultaneously. That is the official explanation. And it collapses under its own weight the moment you actually look at the buildings. When you stand inside the Kirkbride Asylums that still remain, you are not looking at hastily constructed institutional housing. You are looking at the absolute zenith of architectural sophistication. Sweeping grand staircases, vaulted ceilings hovering over echoing galleries, decorative hand-carved stonework that would have required armies of master craftsmen working for decades, steam heating systems seamlessly integrated into thick stone walls, gaslighting infrastructure threaded flawlessly through miles of stone corridors. These are not buildings that a fledgling post-colonial republic threw up in a decade to house its troubled citizens. These are buildings that were already there. And the timeline is the most glaring impossibility. The Kirkbride Plan was published in 1854. Within 15 years, just 15 years, hundreds of these monumental complexes had supposedly been constructed from scratch across the United States alone. At a time when there were no power tools, no steel frame construction techniques, no automobile transport, for millions of tons of materials, and no cohesive national labor market. A building of this staggering complexity, if built today with all of our modern diesel machinery and computer modeling, would take 5 to 10 years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They supposedly built dozens of them simultaneously in the middle of nowhere. Who built them? Where did the tens of thousands of skilled laborers come from? Where are the exhaustive construction records, the massive quarry contracts, the photographic accounts of the severe disruption such titanic projects would have caused to the surrounding rural communities? The silence in the archives is deafening. By 1880, there were over 140 massive public psychiatric institutions operating in the United States. Pause on that number for a moment. 140 monumental institutions, each housing, on average, several hundred patients, some housing over 1,000. The Willard Asylum in New York held over 2,000 people at its peak. The Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts, the Napa State Hospital in California, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia. All of them filled rapidly, efficiently, and quietly, almost as soon as their doors officially opened. We are told these patients came from local poorhouses. We are told that rapid industrialization had created a brand new class of the mentally disturbed, that urban crowding, alcohol, and the sudden stresses of modern factory life had broken the minds of ordinary people in unprecedented numbers. Perhaps. But when you bypass the narrative and look directly at the admission records that survive, and many of them conspicuously do not survive, you find categories of diagnosis that have no modern medical equivalent. Moral insanity. And then there is the most striking diagnosis of all: nostalgia. Nostalgia. The uncontrollable longing for a home that no longer exists. This was classified in the 1860s and 1870s as a legitimate, severe form of mental illness, one requiring immediate institutional confinement. Ask yourself, who is nostalgic? For what home? For what world? The official explanation waves this away, claiming these were simply homesick Civil War soldiers or displaced rural immigrants missing the old country. But the sheer volume of the confined suggests something vastly larger was happening. The timing is not incidental. The great wave of asylum construction and patient intake begins in earnest in the 1840s and 1850s. This is the exact same decade in which the world maps begin to change. The same decade in which Tartaria, or whatever we choose to call the prior global civilization, whose impossibly grand buildings still stand in every major city in the world, begins to disappear from official cartography. The 1860 Steeler Atlas still clearly shows Tartaria. By 1880, it is gone. Not conquered, not absorbed, simply excised as though it had never existed. And in the exact window of that cartographic erasure, the grand asylums fill to the brim with people suffering from an uncontrollable longing for a world that was suddenly gone. But the adults weren't the only ones who needed to be processed. Between 1854 and 1929, approximately 250,000 children were transported by rail from the crowded cities of the eastern seaboard to rural, isolated towns across the Midwest. the Great Plains, and the American South. This was known as the Orphan Train movement, organized primarily by Charles Loring Brace and the Children's Aid Society. The official explanation states these were the abandoned, starving children of urban poverty, kindly given a fresh start with wholesome farm families, who needed the extra agricultural labor. But the deeper you look into the orphan trains, the more the narrative fractures, because 250,000 is not a number that emerges from ordinary urban poverty, not in the mid-19th century, not in a country that only had a total population of around 30 million people at the time. The cities of New York, Boston, and Philadelphia were not, by any reasonable demographic or historical analysis, generating abandoned children at the massive industrialized rate required to fill those westbound trains week after week, year after year. So where did they come from? Researchers investigating the physical locations of the orphan processing centers have noted something chilling. The collection points for these children were frequently in the exact same neighborhoods, the exact same buildings, and occasionally the very same institutional complexes that processed the newly arrived inmates of the asylum system. The children and the lunatics moved through parallel, intersecting bureaucratic channels. These children often had no surnames. In many documented cases, they had newly invented surnames assigned to them upon arrival at the rail distribution points. When they did retain their original names, they were frequently Germanic, Slavic, or deeply unfamiliar, names that suggested origins in cultural communities that, according to official history, were not supposed to exist in significant numbers in North America at that time. They were not the typical Irish or English names you would expect from the impoverished immigrant slums of the Lower East Side. They were different. Names, older names, names from somewhere else. If these children were truly the tragic orphans of ordinary American urban poverty, why did so many of them arrive in the system without a single shred of documentation proving their prior existence? And where exactly were they being sent? This is where the geography of the era reveals a secondary, deeply unsettling pattern. Between 1820 and 1900, hundreds of utopian communities suddenly appeared across the American interior. New Harmony, Indiana, founded in 1825. The Oneida Community in New York in 1848. The Amana Colonies in Iowa in 1855. The list extends to over 700 fully documented, isolated communities in North America alone. Official history frames these as idealistic experiments in communal living, driven by religious fervor and the peculiar freedom of the American frontier. But look at the mechanics of these settlements. Many of these communities appear to have arrived completely formed. They were not built gradually by struggling converts and starving settlers. They appeared with complex organizational structures already perfectly intact, their advanced trades already distributed among members, their large-scale buildings already functional. Visitors who documented these utopias in their early years frequently noted with profound surprise how established they seemed. There was none of the fumbling, chaotic improvisation you would naturally expect from a brand new social experiment, and their skills were impossible. The Amana colonies, right from their founding moments, were producing ultra-high-quality textiles, precision furniture, and complex technical instruments. They weren't learning how to produce them on the harsh frontier. They were producing them as though the ancient, refined knowledge had been carried there, intact from somewhere else. The Harmony Society of Pennsylvania, the Rappites, arrived supposedly from Germany in 1804. Within a single decade, they had built 2 model towns of such breathtaking sophistication that wealthy visitors compared them favorably to the great, established cities of Europe. And then, bizarrely, they dismantled their social structure, moved to Indiana, and then moved again, leaving behind magnificent buildings that the next wave of ordinary settlers could neither explain nor maintain. Were these really religious utopias? Or were they refugee camps? Were these the isolated communities that absorbed the last free survivors of whatever catastrophe had occurred? The people who managed to avoid the asylums because they still had too much social cohesion, too much shared knowledge, too much of the prior world still intact within them? When you overlay the destination maps of the orphan trains with the geographical distribution of these utopian communities, the locations are not identical, but they rhyme perfectly. The nameless children were sent west. The highly skilled, mysterious communities were already waiting. In the West, certain surviving community records from the 1860s show a quiet influx of children with no documented prior history. Children who were absorbed silently, without fanfare, into the communal structure. They weren't documented as official orphans. They weren't listed as new arrivals. They were simply present in the later census records, despite being entirely absent from the earlier ones. And just as you begin to grasp the sheer scale of this domestic containment system, the official explanation finally, definitively breaks. Because this was not just an American phenomenon. In the exact same decade that Dorothea Dix was campaigning to fill the massive, pre-existing asylums in the United States, identical campaigns were suddenly underway in Britain, in France, in the German states, in Canada, Argentina, in Australia. The exact same architectural templates, the exact same diagnostic categories of nostalgia and moral insanity, the exact same sudden, globally synchronized appearance of massive, supposedly rapid-built stone institutions, filled immediately with populations that the local demographic records cannot account for. The Yarra Bend Asylum in Melbourne, Australia, supposedly built in 1848, the Gladesville Hospital in Sydney, 1838, the Sunnyside Hospital in Christchurch, New Zealand, 1863, all of them mirroring the complex Kirkbride architectural logic before Dr. Kirkbride's plan had even been published, before the age of mass communication, before the transatlantic telegraph cable had connected these distant continents in any reliable way. How do you coordinate a flawless, worldwide institutional building project in the 1840s? How do you ensure that Australia, New Zealand, South America, and Western Europe all simultaneously adopt functionally identical approaches to the containment of an unspecified, rapidly growing population using identical architectural marvels with absolutely no visible communication infrastructure capable of achieving that coordination? The establishment. Historians say it was simply the natural spread of ideas through professional journals and Enlightenment humanitarianism. But ideas do not quarry millions of tons of sandstone. Ideas do not thread steam pipes through miles of granite, corridors. Ideas do not quietly process 250,000 nameless children through a continent-spanning railway network. Something coordinated this. Something moved across the world. The deeper you plunge into the historical archive, the more you are forced to notice what isn't there. It isn't the presence of contradicting evidence that chills you. It is the engineered absences, the gaps. The 1850 census categories in the United States include a specific demographic designation that, by the 1870 census, has vanished entirely. Not evolved, not renamed, deleted. As though a shadow bureaucracy went back through the architecture of the state and cleanly removed a specific category of human being, which brings us back to the walls of the Danvers State Hospital, to the strange cursive documents and the impossible, unrecognized wooden carvings sealed in the stone. The last Tartarians were taken somewhere. The only question left is whether any fragment of their truth survived the journey.